If I asked you to name what, in your opinion, the most strangely designed hero in Overwatch is, I think I'd hear a couple answers. I imagine Ball would be near the top of that list, perhaps Sombra, Symmetra, or maybe even Moira. However, there's one character I'd venture to guess would not get a single mention which tops my personal list. Anyone want to guess? No, it's not venture. Read the title. It's D.Va. Through pure familiarity, many truly alien character designs nowadays get dismissed as normal because they're classic Overwatch characters. Like, if you really think about it, Mercy is a deeply strange character design for a game like Overwatch, but that just doesn't really stick out much, because she's become the face of its support role. It's kind of hard for her to feel weird when she's been here for that long and she's so iconic to the game. But then there's D.Va. D.Va isn't a weird character because of her abilities, though. Frankly, they're the most vanilla thing about her. Her guns are effectively just automatic shotguns, whose most unique feature is the infinite ammo. Even that isn't completely unique. Her micro missiles are just bog standard extra damage. Hell, they hardly even provide splash damage with how small the explosion radius is. They're more for the direct hits. Defense Matrix is one amongst a dozen suck abilities in the game that only really stands out because of its range and resource meter. Really, the only particularly unique thing about her is the whole mech mechanic. Even then, its impact on the gameplay beyond allowing her ult to function the way that it does is rarely all that significant. Each individual part of D.Va's kit is for the most part pretty innocuous. What makes it so strange is, well, put them together and what are you supposed to do on this character exactly? No, seriously, I mean it. If you're skeptical on this point, I want you to pause right now and try and explain what it is you are intended to do with your kit as a D.Va player. What are your responsibilities or intended purposes? Hell, if you have the patience with it and you aren't going to skip ahead, go comment below what you think the purpose of D.Va is going to be going into this video before you listen any further. A decent amount of you may at least know that D.Va's a dive tank, but could you say what role she's intended to fill in a dive comp? When you actually plop her kit into a game, it can seem clunky and weird. I mean, you look at Reinhardt and it's pretty intuitive. He bullies people out at close range with his big fat hammer, and he can temporarily negate long-range pressure with his shield, so he can allow his teammates to peek angles they otherwise couldn't push, and he'll be able to clear out most areas of the map that he approaches to make space for his team, thanks to the fact that no one wants to see that hammer up close. Then you look at Winston, and it isn't hard to see. You dive backline, forcing resources to be used on you and diverting a lot of aggro and attention, creating opportunities for the rest of your team to push in while the enemies aren't looking or don't have cooldowns. But then you look at D.Va. Do you do the same sort of jump in, jump out as you do on Winston on her? I mean, not really. They may both be dive tanks, but it's clear to see that D.Va plays in dive much differently to Winston, Wrecking Ball, or even Doomfist. I mean, can D.Va boost us in? Well, yeah, sometimes, if the sight lines aren't particularly long or the enemy team's comp is light on CC abilities. But frankly, on maps with longer sight lines, or when there's rocks and hooks to watch out for, boosters becomes the kind of thing you can only really use to engage without dying amidst the chaos of a developing team fight. It's not really something you can get away with throwing out there unpunished in the neutral fight. And I mean, don't even get me started on trying to boost us out. At least boosting in, you can use Defense Matrix to get away with a bit more than usual, but you can't slide into the DMs of your own behind as much as you may want to. So given that D.Va's kit doesn't consistently allow her to initiate dives, and is even less consistent when it comes to escaping, maybe she's just a frontline tank? Okay, no, D.Va is probably the worst tank in the entire game to try frontlining with. Any other frontline tank bullies you out in close range, and at long range you get farmed by poke damage for free ult charge without the ability to hit back. And all the while, you have to hold up DM just to exist, let alone actually doing anything with it. So what the hell then? You're inconsistent at diving backline, you're useless at holding the front line, and you lose any close quarters brawls with any other tank except maybe the other dive tanks like Winston and Ball. What does this character actually even do then? Well, despite this awful neutral, when you actually play her, once the fights descend into the blind chaos we know and love, you slowly start to see the vision. a unique value creeps in, but it can be hard to understand how or why at first. That is because if you wanted me to explain the role of D.Va in as few words as possible, I would say your job is twofold: to punish mistakes and support dives. Now that might make her sound very big brain, but actually, I think this is exactly why D.Va's design is deeply flawed in a 5v5 format. Oh boy, here we go. Listen, I'd love to have avoided this topic if possible, but in this case, I really can't dodge it here. It is too important to understanding the current state of D.Va. We have to talk about 5v5 versus 6v6 as much as this topic is a dead horse right now. All cards on the table, I'm a 5v5er, and I know that many of you are already recoiling in horror at the sound of that. But if you are, you don't have to worry too much, because for the context of this video, I'm mostly going to be critiquing 5v5 actually. That is because, quite frankly, I think the way that most people talk about certain tanks not functioning in 5v5 is usually pretty overblown. However, I do think there are a handful of exceptions, which if anything, I almost think people don't complain enough about how terribly these tanks function in 5v5. One of these characters isn't even an off-tank like many people would expect. I think Reinhardt actually translated pretty damn poorly to 5v5, but my number one pick for character most detrimentally affected by the move to 5v5 has got to be D.Va. So first up, I'll try and make this quick. The shortest version I can muster of why I like 5v5 better is because of three big reasons. 1. I like that it made supports feel more vulnerable, even as an animain, because the whole appeal of the support role to me is having the skills to prepare for and outsmart enemies that are desperate to dive you. Pumping heals ain't a skill, doing it while being hunted down is. Healing is just the reward you get for still being alive. 2. I like that it made for less stale games that stall out at a single ultra-oppressive choke point for 5 minutes, because that makes taking angles more consistently feasible and valuable, which leads to greater skill expression. And 3, and this is the big one, as much as many may claim to miss them, I fundamentally think off-tanks are just flat-out unhealthy for the game. And as much as I'd love to leave it there, there's a lot of unpacking I've got to do on that point, and at the very least this will be somewhat related to the way I want to bring this back into the D.Va conversation. But why do I think that off-tanks are fundamentally unhealthy? Well, it's mostly because in an interaction where, let's say a support gets dove, but then they get saved by the off-tank. Think about who is expressing skill here and who is being rewarded. The support is playing poorly. They left themselves open to a dive like that with no cooldowns, let's say. So let's be real, they should be punished. They should die. But instead, they not only get bailed out, but also often get rewarded with a kill onto their attacker on the way out if they get something like a bubble. Not always, but pretty often. The off-tank has to express some moderate skill in terms of positioning well and having good enough awareness to be prepared to react with the bubble, but generally all they do is press a button, and yet they're rewarded. Meanwhile, the guy who correctly dove in after having identified a support being out of position and wasting their cooldowns, on top of the movement they'd have to employ to even make the approach and the shots they'd have to hit, but despite all that, they don't get rewarded for the skill they express. Now instead, they get punished for doing their job, despite pretty arguably expressing more skill than the off-tank and the support in this example combined. You could argue, well no, they made a misplay by not considering the off-tank's cooldowns as well. But while I can see there's some merit to this argument, can I just be real with you for a second? How many cooldowns do you want to have to force in a normal game of Overwatch? Oh, I'm sorry, God Genji 6969. I know that you identified the Kiriko out of position here with no TP and no Suzu, forced out the immortality field, and bled out all of the D.Va's defense matrix so that you could dive them. But oopsie, you also forgot to force out the Zarya bubble. Ah, tough luck. You just have to play smarter next time and remember not just to force out 4 get out of jail free cooldowns, but actually force out all 5 of them before you're allowed to actually play the game. Can you see what I mean here? In an ideal world, forcing out these resources is a team effort and not all of them would be used on you, I understand, but also, you've had those games, haven't you, where every button in the world is used on making you miserable. And quite frankly, I think Overwatch could do with a little less instant bailout no matter how stupid you are, you live because I press this button kind of abilities. Long story short, when an off-tank does their job, they punish skillful play from your enemies while rewarding brain-dead plays from your allies. That combined with the fact that everyone loves having an off-tank to bodyguard them, but very few people actually like being the off-tank, as off-tanks were generally very unpopular picks, it just seems to me off-tanks contribute nothing but misery to the game. So I'm pretty staunch in my opposition to them as a design concept. Now, unfortunately, as time went on, they overbuffed support survivability and did little to help the design of tanks that struggled in 5v5 to adapt to the new format, leading to me now being a little more neutral on the 5v5 question. I still believe the best version of Overwatch is 5v5, and would look something a lot like early 5v5 back in the betas and first couple seasons of Overwatch 2. But also, to be quite frank, I don't believe the devs have the balls to ever nerf support survivability back to where it should be again, as much as I hate to say it. And I'm skeptical that they care enough to significantly rework the tanks that need the help in 5v5, given how long they've had to do it and how little progress they've made on that front. As a result, in its current state, while ideologically I'm more of a 5v5er, in fairness, with the game as it is right now, I don't have that much of a preference between 5v5 and 6v6, so I play a bit of both modes. Though I will say, I'm usually more of a quick play guy, but is it me or are people insufferable in 6v6 quick play? It's not like that in 5v5 quick play. I don't know what it is. People play really, really weird and annoying in 6v6 quick play. Seems like everyone's off in their own world. Side tangent. Ultimately though, if your 6v6 or die sensibilities are withering at the sound of such blasphemy, here's where you get a little bit of respite from it all. Because I'm going to admit something. While I am very anti-off-tank, there is one off-tank I believe managed to have a very healthy design in 6v6. And that one off-tank was D.Va. So, as if this video didn't have enough tangents, it's now, this late into the video, I should probably give a quick definition of what an off-tank is again. A little late, I know, but I think most players at least have a vibe for what they kind of are. This is the point of the video though where a vibe isn't going to be good enough. So although I've covered it in previous videos, the short version is this. Main tanks make space, off tanks enforce space. In other words, they ensure the space the main tank makes stay an absolute death trap for enemies trying to encroach into it so that they can't take it back. But usually, outside of their ultimates, their ability to actually make space themselves is severely restricted. Many tanks like Sigma can occupy an in-between spot, where they can be the main or off tank depending on the comp. But some are strictly main tanks, and some are strictly off tanks. D.Va, Zarya, and Roadhog are the three tanks that are strictly off tanks. Of these three, Roadhog is widely regarded as one of the most atrociously designed characters in the game. Just unfortunately one that's cursed to remain the way they are forever, because of how satisfying the hook combo is, admittedly. I mean, I'm not above it. I love hooking people with Roadhog too. I can just acknowledge that while also saying his design is awful. At this point though, it's just too hard baked into his identity, and we can clearly see with how much of a flop the Roadhog rework was. One of the only flop reworks I want to say that they've done in Overwatch 2. The devs clearly don't have the courage to actually make radical changes to Roadhog that might change his poor identity. Zarya, on the other hand, is less universally hated, but also hardly beloved, and I would argue one of the most underhated terrible character designs in Overwatch, having very little skill expression and individual impact. But then, there's D.Va. And D.Va is a weird one, because she is the only off-tank in the entire game that's also a dive tank. That combo is deeply strange if you actually think about it. Considering the purpose of an off-tank is to enforce your already existing space, and yet the purpose of a dive tank is to dive into the enemy space and try to take it from them, it kind of forces you to ask yourself the age-old question. Do you protect or attack? The difficulty in answering this, in my view, is what causes there to be such a severely sharp divide in the skill of most D.Va players. I'm not sure if anyone else has noticed, but in my experience, there really is almost no such thing as a mid-D.Va player. They're always either brain-dead or goated with no in-between. And sure, maybe in your average quick play game, you can see a lean towards brain-dead, I don't know. But when I see a good D.Va, I'm often thinking, damn, what the hell are you doing in my diamond lobbies? You're playing like you belong in Grandmaster, man. In my view, it seems the way to approach D.Va is so messy and confusing that most simply choose violence and never look back. They attack, and they attack, and they attack, but they never protect. unless the opportunity to do so walks literally right in front of their face. This can work for a bit in the metal ranks, but because the enemies need to make a mistake for D.Va to get away with a dive alone, as you climb and enemies make less mistakes, playing D.Va in this headstrong manner will get your skull bashed into one too many walls, spears, and rocks, and it's going to stop working eventually. So, how do you play good D.Va? Well, that's a question I've been striving to answer for a while. Frankly, because I developed an immense respect for the players that knew how. They were always great team players with seemingly superhuman awareness and reaction time, but just always seemed to find a way to be in the right place at the right time by what felt like pure blind luck and magic. And yet they were far too consistent with it for it to just be lucky breaks. There was a science to it, just a subtle one that was invisible to my untrained eye at the time. In fact, the spark that initiated the earliest ideas of a video about D.Va happened years ago. In early 2020, back when Overwatch 1 was still around, but on its deathbed, before the release of Overwatch 2, I remember playing a game of Hanamura as Ana, and I remember there being a D.Va in that game. Now, I must admit, I don't remember who the main tank was because this game was so long ago, but what I do remember is that we were defending first point, and we were holding that doorway, that really narrow choke. And I remember that I was playing on the high ground until I decided to do something a bit cheeky. You see, the fight was encroaching slowly forward and going behind the doorway. As a result, I wasn't able to see people to heal them easily, and as well as that, I was getting really concerned about the enemy Roadhog's ability to just walk on my teammates as they went a little too deep. So I got a bit cheeky. I jumped off the high ground, and I went looking for a cheeky nade I could throw at the hog, and then dive back into cover. I thought I could get away with this because my main tank and my D.Va were trying to 2v4 in the front line. There was absolute chaos going on, and it looked like no one would be looking at the doorway because everyone would be looking at the two tanks rushing into the enemy team. However, I was wrong. Most of the enemy team was looking at the two tanks, but the Roadhog knew what was up. They were staring at the doorway, and the second I peek, before I can react, they already have me hooked. I've just about accepted my fate when suddenly I see the D.Va, who by the way doesn't even have line of sight to me or the Roadhog, apparently just catch the sound cue of the hook connecting and instinctively know, despite looking in the opposite direction, exactly where me and the Roadhog are standing, and manages to flick their defense matrix over to the Roadhog shotgun just barely in time, probably at max range as well, delete the shotgun blast, let me get away and live, and immediately rush back into the 2v3 they're having with their main tank deep in the enemy backline, which by the way they proceeded to then win. And to be honest, not only was I impressed with the skill of that play, not only did that make me go, damn, I wish I was that good at D.Va. I know I wouldn't have hit that defense matrix, even if I would have wanted to. But beyond that, it kind of made me realize, hang on a minute. Even though I've played this game a lot, that might be the first time I've particularly noticed a play from a D.Va and been like, damn, that was good. I couldn't help but notice to me that this D.Va, who was just particularly good at the game apparently, felt almost like they were playing a completely different character than the D.Va that I knew. And so that really was what sparked my curiosity about the character. While I strive to learn just about everyone as deeply as I can in Overwatch, and have a particularly diverse hero pool of basically everyone in the game who doesn't need to click heads to function, my specialty has basically always been dive, particularly dive supports and dive tanks. As a result, I did have a bit of a head start when picking up D.Va with some really solid general dive game sense, but a lot of that was in my ability to bob in and out, force resources and mistakes while not getting caught out along the way. Like I said though, D.Va's a different kind of dive tank. She doesn't really do that, so she's always the one I've had to work the hardest to grasp. That combined with the fact that my aim is my weakest trait, and particularly my tracking in close quarters, when D.Va is one of the few tanks that is actually quite demanding when it comes to up-close tracking and accuracy. And basically what I'm trying to say is, while I think I've made a lot of progress, I still don't think I'm quite there yet. I am not here to claim that I have become that go-to D.Va, but I think I understand now what it is I need to become to do it, as well as why so few people are built for becoming that go-to D.Va main. Going in, one of the most baffling things immediately to me was defense matrix. I did correctly identify basically immediately that it would be the main reason to play D.Va over any other dive tank, that without it you were just better off locking Winston. But how to use it was another story. Like sure, use it to not die and use it to peel for backline. Seems simple enough. In practice though, using defense matrix to not die felt kinda bad. I mean, if you had to do it, it was obviously the right play, but it's hard to ignore the fact that I'm burning my most valuable resource just to exist, and I don't even get to shoot while I'm doing it. Why the hell would I do this when I'd rather just drop a bubble on Winston? That way I could still negate poke and block cooldowns like sleeps and antis, while still having full freedom to move, turn, and attack anywhere I want. Not to mention bubble can actually block rock and hack. Defense matrix doesn't even do that. Sure enough, trying to play D.Va like a slower, chunkier Winston predictably just flops, at least in games that I wasn't already going to win. On top of that, I repeatedly end up going into these games sincerely planning to peel for backline when needed, but every time the backline needs help, I'm in too deep to run back and give them defense matrix even if I notice what's going on immediately. Just like every other metal rank D.Va for the most part, I only get the chance to peel for people who walk directly in front of me. Maybe I was one step up, I could sometimes turn around, but if it meant going backwards, a lot of the times it wasn't happening. So I tried for a few games to just camp backline to keep our support safe, but this just seems to go even worse. We end up constantly opening with stagnant neutral fights where our passivity allows the enemies to crawl forward completely unchallenged, slowly take all the angles, and then stuff us into a choke for the rest of the game. So what the hell? I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. What am I doing wrong? Well, here's what I've learned over the years trying to more thoroughly understand this character. To start, I'm still in monkey brain mode, and as a result, I was placing too much focus on what the enemies are doing, and not enough on what my own team is doing. On Winton, or indeed Ham and Hampter, I would often be focusing most of my brain power on tracking the positions and cooldowns of each enemy, so that I can identify their weakest spot to dive. I don't often do this immediately expecting a kill, I expect it to force a reaction, and I'm often trying to make that forced reaction put them in a disadvantageous position that my team can either exploit to get a kill, or if it lasts long enough, I can exploit the next time my cooldowns are up to jump in before they are able to recover, and then I can maybe get a kill. That being said, because I'm tracking so many enemy cooldowns and positions, and I'm in deep without knowing whatever my team's doing behind my back, I often don't quite know what's going on back there. I can use my game sense and knowledge of our comp to estimate the likely positions my supports and DPS would want to take given the circumstances without having to look back, but I'll rarely know the more fine details like the exact position everyone is or the cooldowns that they currently have up, unless they have particularly distinctive sound cues or are particularly important like, let's say, Suzu. Point being, while I never ignore what my team is doing as a dive tank, on these more self-sufficient ones, I only need approximate knowledge of it to do my job, and so I focus most of my brain power on what the enemies are doing. D.Va is different. You rarely get to get away with spooking people to bait a reaction, just to see if you can then get an advantage off of that reaction. If you're going in, you're going in. And you better believe you're getting the kill, because if you aren't, you're probably just going to end up feeding. This means you dive less frequently, but when you do, you're all in whether you like it or not. So you have to know for a fact that both the enemy have placed themselves in a position where they are fucked, and on top of that, your team is in a position to follow up and capitalize on that dive, effectively doubling the awareness required as well as raising the bar for the speed of decision making from fast to near instant. Another reason you gotta be out for blood with every dive with D.Va is because the moment you're in, your backline is just too juicy a target to turn down, and you're no longer in a position to help. You're too far forward, you're too deep. Going in like this is only worthwhile if you can put out so much pressure on the enemy backline that it either forces the enemy team to walk it back to stop you and protect their backline, leads to you trading backlines as you punish them for leaving theirs open, just like you did for your own backline, or ideally, you're quick enough in and out that the enemies don't even have time to take out your backline while you're gone. Bottom line being, you can't be making plays just to force out Sleep Dart on D.Va, because unlike on other dive tanks who can more consistently soft engage, often the price of your soft engages will be the life of your supports. Ultimately, what you have to understand, potentially more than anything as D.Va, is that you suck in the neutral. But you're a little OP, both in the disadvantage and the advantage state, provided you're where you need to be. In the disadvantage state, you're invaluable if you're DMing backline and escorting them out of danger, while potentially having the up-close firepower to punish the enemies that are diving a little too deep to kill your backline. It's very hard to boost in and kill someone as D.Va, but it's very easy if they come to you, and then you can use boosters to chase them when they try to get away instead. In the advantage state, on the other hand, that's even easier. Often you can just hard W into their team unpunished and abuse the lack of CC and focus fire to go wherever the hell you want. It's just the neutral that sucks. And as a result, in the neutral, you either got to use the threat of plays you might make to force reactions, rather than having to actually commit to said plays, or you got to enable your teammates to make something happen for you. Holding defense matrix on an ally DPS as they go in is almost as powerful as giving them a bubble. Not to mention, unlike Zarya, D.Va can actually jump in there with their teammate to support the dive with extra follow-up firepower. As a result, D.Va sort of ends up flipping the dynamic of most dive tanks on its head, where usually you're more concerned with how prepared the enemies are for you than your teammates. With D.Va, it's far more important to know when your teammates are ready for you than your enemies. On other dive tanks, your lose condition is usually just dying too frequently without having done enough to warrant such feeding. And while that's still a concern on D.Va, for her the lose condition is far more her teammates dying because she decided to run it down at a bad time, or losing map control because you missed too many opportunities to enable your teammates to pick a fight. You might notice, both of these lose conditions involve you being oblivious and neglectful of the intentions of your teammates rather than the intentions of the enemies. This is why I believe that D.Va is the only example of a healthy off-tank, at least in a 6v6 format. A big part about what I find unhealthy about Zarya, for example, is the fact that bubbling your teammates, or even yourself, isn't really much of a decision. You see an enemy coming, you hit a button, your teammate gets bubble, and you did your job. Congratulations, your level of demonstrated intelligence and sentience is one step above that of a Torb turret. You see stimulus, then hit response. Good job. Unless, oh no, is the teammate not in line of sight? Well, now you can't bubble them, but with your complete lack of mobility, there's not much you can really do about that. So you're not even really being punished for a wrong decision, it's just the guy who wants to bubble went somewhere you can't bubble them, and that's kind of their fault most of the time. I'm not saying there's literally no skill expression to bubbling on Zarya at all. You can eke out an extra percentage or two of extra charge with good bubble timing, and sometimes you can compensate for minor positioning mistakes from your allies when you need to bubble them by getting into position ahead of time if you can see a dive coming, just to make sure they don't break line of sight. But generally speaking, the skill expression you do have are minor optimizations. D.Va's defense matrix is much more skill expressive on the other hand, because of the fact it's a shorter range, but you have full control of where it goes, on a character with better mobility. Typically speaking, you want the DM in backline during disadvantage and frontline during advantage, but it takes time to boost from the backline to the frontline and back. You need to decide where you're going to need to be in a couple seconds in the future, which means you need a good read on the direction the fight is going at all times. You can't just react to what happens in front of you, you're going to be too late every time. Zarya, on the other hand, just follows her main tank around like a dog on a leash without much agency to walk up on her own. Either people are in her LOS to get bubble, or they aren't, and for the most part, if they aren't, it isn't really usually your fault on Zarya. On D.Va, if someone needed Matrix and you didn't give it, there was almost always a way you could have done it with the right movement and timing, and you probably made a slight misread about some aspect of the fight somewhere along the line. Your decisions actually matter on D.Va, whereas they don't matter so much on Zarya. Not to mention, while it's certainly diminished compared to the main tanks, D.Va at least has more of an ability to push up alone than a Zarya or a Hog. It's usually best to push together with a main tank, but you still get windows of opportunity to make decisions of your own, not just small optimizations of the one job you're allowed to do, like with Zarya. I would also use Hog as an example, it's just Hog is a messy one, and it's simpler if we focus on Zarya as a comparison point. Either way, it's pretty safe to say the skill expression of D.Va is higher than that of Roadhog. In fact, in general, I think no character in the game even comes close to requiring the level of awareness and quick decision making that D.Va does, and that's saying something. I feel like I'm generally pretty good on my awareness and brisk with my decision making in this game, but to play D.Va well, you need to be insane on your awareness of not only the fight that you're having, but every other fight your other teammates are in simultaneously, on top of upgrading those brisk reactions to lightning fast ones. I can keep up with the pace of most characters in this game, but D.Va is the one exception where if enough shit just starts happening around me, and I gotta start snapping my neck every 3 seconds to understand everything that's happening around me, when I gotta know where my pressure needs to be and where my DM needs to be, she is the only one where sometimes it just all melts in my brain after a little too long. and I don't know what planet I'm on anymore, or remember what I even just did 2 seconds ago. The only character I can sometimes get that on as well is Ball, but even then, I only usually get that on Ball if I'm trying to focus on performing a tech like a wall jump during a hectic team fight. If I just gotta roll in and not do anything fancy, it's just about where I roll in and when, I'm usually good as fast as Ball may be. All that said, why do I consider D.Va to be the tank most thoroughly destroyed in design by the move to 5v5? Well, the general consensus is that the off tanks were the hardest hit. They were designed to support a main tank, and now they don't have one to support. So, it makes sense. That being said, while it's popular to declare Zarya and Hog examples of tanks that don't function in 5v5, I've got to push back on that a little. I concede that they work better in 6v6 of course, but let's not exaggerate. Zarya works perfectly fine in 5v5. While dive tanks and Reinhardts were some of Zarya's better bubble targets, so were dive DPS, who she can still bubble now in 5v5. Not to mention 5v5 enables DPS to off-angle more, and Zarya can often enable DPS to take greedier off-angles by bubbling them when enemies try to punish them. I'd agree that she feels a little more boring, especially when the right play ends up being to just self-bubble yourself twice and walk up. That's really boring, but I don't think she was deeper or more exciting by all that much in 6v6 either. Like, sure, it's a downgrade, but she kind of went from being as deep as a puddle to being as deep as a single drop of water. I mean, it's a downgrade, I guess, but it's not like he was very deep beforehand. Roadhog, on the other hand, is an even easier one. He's Roadhog. He is one of the greatest train wrecks of hero design in Overwatch history, and even if he can be fun to play from time to time, he feels awful in 5v5. He felt awful in 6v6. Really, the only reason I'd even concede he was better in 6v6 is because if you had to deal with him, at least you could get maybe a bubble or a DM. So if Zarya and Roadhog weren't really that bad in 5v5 in my opinion, why is D.Va so special? Why do I think that she stands out among the major off-tanks as particularly bad in the 5v5 format? Well, beyond her having further to fall, being the only one I consider to be a well-designed tank in the first place, in 5v5, without a main tank, D.Va has to wait for her DPS to walk up. She gives them defense matrix, and effectively give the DPS the ability to be the tank, rather than being the tank herself. This is fine if your DPS know how to be the initiator in a fight, or they're on a dive DPS well suited to charging in first. But what if they aren't? DPS players are typically good at hitting shots, taking duels, and maybe off-angling. However, some DPS players don't know what to do when their tank doesn't get the ball rolling for them. So when you say to your DPS player, hey sorry, I just can't be the tank here, but I can use my abilities to make you the tank, so you're going to have to handle this one, buddy. While most can handle the responsibility serviceably enough, and some might even thrive under these conditions, others will disappoint. Sometimes they just don't have the skill set to know how to engage because they aren't tank players. They came to queue DPS. So they'll go dive the deepest, greediest target they are never going to get a chance to kill even with full DM on them all the way, or more often though they do even worse, and still play like a shy, indecisive little coward even as you babysit them with defense matrix. While this is very frustrating, it also makes complete sense. DPS players didn't queue DPS to play tank, so some of them are just going to be bad at being a tank for you while you hold DM on them. That's not what they signed up to do. In fairness, you could argue Zarya has this problem too, and I do think she has it to a lesser extent, but I don't think it's as bad for Zarya. In 5v5, Zarya is not only such a demon up close, and with the ability to double bubble herself, sometimes she really can just walk up and get kills, and it's fine. But even in the narrow situations where you can't really get much done by just walking up with bubbles, the fact that your ability to bubble allies is much longer range than D.Va's defense matrix means that it's easier for you to bubble a DPS that is on an off angle without you having to actually commit to being on that off angle with them where you might get punished. D.Va, on the other hand, if you want to help that DPS, you got to be there with them. And again, if they're trying to play from an off angle, that might be a little awkward for you, especially if that's not actually a good position for you to take, it's just a good position for your DPS to take. And on top of all this isn't even to mention, what exactly is a D.Va player supposed to do when her teammates lock Widow, Ashe, Alari, Lifeweaver? If your team is just packed with characters that aren't designed to walk forward, you kind of lose your ability to even make any space, even with teamwork. I have played some games like this on D.Va, almost as a morbid curiosity, as like a, okay, so what the hell do you do when they pick these characters? Can you even play D.Va? And I found the best practice in this situation is just to bodyguard your stacked backline, DM them during their epic sniper duels, and hope they hit some shots. And in fairness, if your team is even just decent, but just playing an agonizing comp to work with, this usually does work, especially since you're very good at chasing anyone who might try to dive in. Still doesn't change the fact that you feel demoted below the rank of Torb Turret to the role of shield generator, and the only individual impact you can have is to get a little too active and throw as a result. My bad, guys. I felt like playing the game a little too much today and ended up throwing. I'm sorry, I'll go back to camping my backline and holding right click on them. Damn, you'd think you're playing Mercy, not D.Va. So yeah, in conclusion, to work consistently in 5v5, D.Va would need some real reworking, so that her kit could be capable of at least soft diving targets, without them needing to make a severe mistake first, for D.Va to even have a chance to approach in any decent skill lobby unpunished. As is right now, there's no real healthy spot with D.Va. Most of the time she has to play it real safe, and that's the healthiest she can be, I guess. But the few patches where she does become very strong, she gets to infinitely run it down mid as a giant killer meatball that runs over everything in its path with minimal skill required. She can be very fun and healthy with cooperative and active DPS, but that is just always going to be a dice roll. And it's a dice roll that decides whether or not she gets to roam free or play on life support all game. D.Va is just so useless in the neutral, but so strong outside of it. I just think that's deeply unhealthy in a 5v5 format where no one can really consistently help her get out of the neutral fight and into the chaos that she thrives in. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.